massive impact on our business. I'm going to be a little political right now, and I'm going to bring you back a couple of years ago when we had the privilege of having Mr. Sousa in here, our previous finance minister. And as I recall, he blew, talk about carbon footprint, because for 45 minutes he blew smoke up our ass in that main room, to the extent that he didn't say anything for 45 minutes. And we just had a finance minister that understands what we deal with on a daily basis. I can tell you that after having some conversations this morning with him. He understands what we face. He understands the realities of our business. He understands that he doesn't want to take choice away from consumers. He understands that the banks would love to go that way because he'd love to have all of us working in cubicles, or the banks would, for $35,000 a year on a salary because we can't afford to get started on an annuitized basis. He understands all of the things that you all understand. He understands that financial advice, as he said, 97% of consumers are happy with it, so why screw with it? He understands that the overwhelming majority of people, I think 80%, have less than $100,000 in investments. So who are they going to be served by, right? We need DSCs, we need embedded commissions. I personally won't talk to anybody with less than $200,000 if I can't do some DSC, because I spend hours and hours and hours with them before I bring the business in. I'm not a bank. Right? So anyways, I'll get off my soapbox, but I was really happy. I mean, when Vic Fideli first made his announcement about DSCs and embedded commissions, I could hear a collective sigh across the industry. Finally, somebody is listening to us. And so that, I want, if you're not yet an IFB member, and you've seen me at this pulpit, this bully pulpit, if you see me up here, I've talked every time I introduce a speaker. I allocate some time to try to have our members and non-members especially understand we need your resources, we need your input, we need the funding, we need our board is all volunteer. Besides the hotel room this week, we don't get paid. The staff is lean and mean and effective. I've never seen an organization run as effectively as this one, and I mean that, and I've been involved with many organizations. And the voice that we have is second to none now in the industry. That's Susan Alving and Nancy Allen and some of our board members. I really can't stress the quality of the organization, the quality of this event, especially blew me away when I first started coming out to these. So I'd like to invite you, non-members, you can join at the summit right now for $159. You've just seen in our finance minister what kind of voice we have. And IFB really, we had representation at the CSA Roundtable. I was sitting there in the audience at the CSA Roundtable. Our chairman, Scott, was there. And Nancy Allen was sitting next to me, and she literally put her hand on my leg to stop me from standing up at one point because of the misinformation lies that were being told by advocates that want to see the DSCs and the embedded commissions go away. So we finally have somebody to listen. So you can join for $159 right now at the summit. If you're not a member, there's strength in numbers. Okay, we need your voice. So now on to our presenter this morning. Vance Lockton is a strategic analyst and principal advisor with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. He currently splits his time between the OPC's Policy and Researching Group, focusing on topics such as consent, online reputation, and de-identification. I just learned what that means today. And the newly formed Business Advisory Directorate. Based in the OPC's Toronto Regional Office, Vance has also worked to build strong, productive relationships with private sector stakeholders in the GTA with the aim of increasing understanding of and compliance with the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. We've all heard of PIDA. So without any further ado, I give you Mr. Vance Lockton.
Right, so I wasn't warned that my introduction, I'm presenting on a regulation, and we're talking about the harms of regulations to small businesses, which fair enough. So I recognize the notion of selling mandatory breach reporting is not that bad, is a tough sell, but I'll do what I can. So, as is noted, I'm with the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. Our mission and mandate, we oversee three pieces of legislation. PIPEDA, the Personal Information Protection Electronic Documents Act, which is private sector privacy law. The Privacy Act, which is the public sector privacy law, and we oversee a small piece of everybody's favorite law, which is the CASL, the Canadian anti-spam law. We oversee the piece that doesn't come up all that much, which is just prohibitions against scraping email addresses from the internet or installing malware on somebody's computer to collect email addresses, neither of which is permitted. The OPC, where we went through a reorg, and I'll talk about this a little later, in April, so we're split into three sectors now. Our compliance sector, our policy and promotion sector, and our corporate services sector, that everybody don't really know about. But we felt it was important with the first two to create more of a true wall than we've had before between this notion of policy and promotion, kind of things that I'm doing right now, and our compliance sector. So we're trying to say that, obviously we have to be aware of what each other is doing, but we want to be able to have, open and frank conversations in our policy and promotion group with stakeholders who don't worry that, what you're telling us is going to be flipped over to our compliance team for investigation. So the focus today, as you know, is breach reporting and under PIPEDA. So PIPEDA, just run through it because this is a national conference, I believe. It applies to collection, use, and disclosure of personal information in the course of commercial activity. It's a national law, except for provinces that have what's been deemed substantially similar legislation. Currently, that's Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec. So if you are operating exclusively within one of those provinces, there will be a private sector law within that province that supersedes PIPEDA. Ontario does not have such a law at the moment. It's always been kicked around that they might get one at some point, but that's a long way off if it happens. So the purpose of PIPEDA, PIPEDA was drafted in 2000 as we started to see more of the growth of the internet. And the idea was to establish rules that strike a balance between the need for the right to privacy for individuals and the need of businesses to collect, use, and disclose personal information for reasonable purposes. So this is not meant to be a consumer advocacy law. This is not meant to be a consumer protection law. This is meant to strike a balance. It's actually meant to be a law that promotes electronic commerce. The long title of the bill actually starts with it's an act to promote and support electronic commerce in Canada, on the notion that individuals aren't going to engage in commerce over the internet. They're not going to use new technologies if they don't have trust in them. So this is an attempt to bring trust into digital interactions. It's a principles-based law. So these 10 principles are based on, they're actually taken straight from the CSA model code that was drafted in 1995. So again, this is an industry-based law. It's an interesting read. It doesn't read like a law because it wasn't drafted as a law. It was drafted as a code of conduct by the CSA. It was just simply taken and adopted and added to the schedule So again, it's a principles-based law, which means that, now we'll say somewhat to the exception of breach reporting, it aims at getting to particular ends. It doesn't prescribe to organizations how you actually achieve the ends of obtaining consent, having appropriate safeguards. But breach reporting to some extent is changing that. It's putting a little bit of structure around what we're expecting for breach reporting. So the breach reporting obligations came into force on November 1st. There's a long history for these obligations. They largely arose from a review of PIPEDA that happened in 2007. They were drafted they were adopted into law finally in the Digital Privacy Act in 2014. And then it was only last year that we finally saw the full set of regulations that was needed in order to bring them into force. So November 1st, they came into force. There's really three key obligations associated with breach reporting. The first one has always been an obligation, which is that organizations have security safeguards appropriate to the level to the sensitivity of the information. That's again something that is nice and difficult to understand for organizations, because we don't set out specific levels of, specific protections that have to be in place, specific, levels of encryption that have to be in place. The law simply says exactly that you must have security safeguards appropriate to the sensitivity of the information. And so that kind of gives you that opportunity and or obligation to have that considered thought of what actually is appropriate for the information that you're holding. The two new obligations that are coming into effect with breach reporting are that you report to the OPC any breach of security safeguards that creates what's called a real risk of significant harm, and that you notify affected individuals of those of such breaches, and that you keep a record of all breaches. There's no actual threshold for that. You have to keep a record of any breach of security safeguards. I'm going to walk through basically the rest of my presentation is kind of walking through exactly what those obligations mean. So I'll also kind of say if there's questions, I'm happy to take them.
All breaches, you don't
Yes.
say for how long. Is there a statute that you should keep in mind, or?
So there's a requirement to keep records from 2 years after the time the record was created.
2 years.
Yeah, you can't keep them longer. The minimum time is 2 years. So start with the security safeguards. When we're talking about security safeguards, it's a broad understanding. So we're not just talking about the firewalls and encryption that you have in place. Security safeguards under PIPEDA are defined in three categories: it's physical, technical, and organizational measures. So physical speaks to the locks on a cabinet, so the pure physical protections for largely paper-based information. Organizational measures, we're talking about the procedures you have in place to ensure that only people who need to know or need to have access to information actually have that access. So that, if you have 100 client files and five advisors, maybe the advisors shouldn't have access to all clients. They should only have access to their clients. So things along those lines. And then the technical measures are what the more standard things that people think about, the encryptions and firewalls and things like that. And so again, the design is of these safeguards to protect against loss, theft, and unauthorized access, disclosure, copying, use, or modification of data. So the breach of security safeguards. So the first question when an incident has been detected is this a breach of security safeguards? So how we're defining that is loss, unauthorized access to, or unauthorized disclosure of personal information, resulting from either the breach of safeguards or a failure to establish safeguards. So the fact that you didn't have the safeguard, the appropriate safeguard in place,